He was perhaps the only parliamentarian in the history of Trinidad and Tobago politics who was officially known by just one name, Ajodhasingh. History researcher Angelo Bissessa says it was a matter of Ajodhasingh preferring to maintain this tangible connection to his Indo-Trinidadian roots rather than opting for the Western concept of having two names. Mr. Bissessa says many people in the village of Rusilac in South Trinidad, where Ajodhasingh was born, had been products of Indian indentureship and were given a first name and a surname only as they became inducted into the Canadian Mission Presbyterian school system.
For instance, there is a family there named Ajodhasingh. Their ancestor was a relative of Ajodhasingh, but he was Ajodhasingh alone. And then there was Parliamentary, one name alone. So that one name would identify you both as a person, and then the Singh being attached to the end identify that person as being of the Kshatriya class or warrior class.
Born in 1906, Ajodhasingh was himself the son of indentured labourers from India who spent most of their life living in barracks in Rusilac and working in the cane fields of South Trinidad. He began his education at the Rusilac Presbyterian Primary School and went on to attend the Naparima College in San Fernando, working as a law clerk after school. It was while he was thus employed at Hobson's, one of San Fernando's best-known and longest surviving law firms, that Ajodhasingh decided to throw his hat in the political ring. He contested the St. Patrick East seat as an independent candidate in the 1950 Legislative Council elections and won.
He was able to rise to a position of intellectual and social prominence, which enabled him to take advantage of the first wave of politicking that followed the introduction of full adult franchise in Trinidad and Tobago in 1946.
But if it is his popularity in St. Patrick East that accounted for his success in his very first elections, it was something entirely unrelated to politics that contributed to that popularity. Ajodhasingh was a masseur, blessed with a skill he inherited from his father to heal people with his hands, in an era before the widespread use of modern medicine had taken hold.
And he was so popular as a masseur and so successful that later on in his political career he was lovingly known as the Minister of Veins and Sprains. It's even alleged that a particular governor at the point in time visited him for a cure for a pain that he could not deal with.
Though he came from a life of poverty and never lost the common touch, Ajodhasingh was not intimidated by wealth or influence. This was indicative of the manner in which he pursued his 1950 election campaign, in which he came up against Timothy Rudall, one of the wealthiest men in the colony and the incumbent Legislative Council representative for St. Patrick East. Rudall was able to organize a massive campaign, the likes of which the people of the southwestern peninsula had never seen before. Tons of eats and drinks, free public entertainment, music, caravans with loudspeakers, and accompanied by busloads of dressed-up supporters.
And Ajodha had a slogan which went, "Drink Rudall's rum and soda, but still go and vote Ajodha."
The slogan proved to be effective. Following his election to the Legislative Council, Ajodhasingh was drafted into a 10-member government, headed by the Colonial Secretary with the Governor of the colony as chairman. Appointed Minister of Communication and Works, his responsibilities included civil aviation, the Central Water Distribution Authority, forerunner of WASA, the Electricity Commission, the Police Licensing Authority, Port Services, Postal Services, Railways and Telegraphs, Roads and Bridges, and Works and Hydraulics. According to the Hansard archives, in 1955, Ajodhasingh set about establishing a water policy for Trinidad and Tobago. Testifying to his abiding concern for the welfare of the ordinary folk, that policy was based principally on the need to bring to the people of the colony potable water at as low a rate as possible. The priorities he established for government action as Minister of Communication and Works and the position he took in many Legislative Council debates, both during and after his stint as a minister, would continue to exemplify the compassion that Ajodhasingh held for the poor man, who made up the majority of the people who had elected him.
The elites of society were few and far between, and while they could carry political clout, the actual numbers are what matters in terms of having one man, one vote and the ballot system. So that by retaining his link with his electorate, Ajodhasingh was able to have some stability as a politician, both in the era when he was an MLC and then later on MP, Member of Parliament for Labrie.
As a member of the Legislative Council and Minister of Communication and Works, Ajodhasingh was also concerned about pursuing and getting Legislative Council approval for several projects that were key to the development of the Southwestern Peninsula. One such project was the improvement of the South Trunk Road, where it passes through the Godino Lagoon in the vicinity of La Romaine.
It was an important project because even though that road had existed since around 1854-55, it was constantly flooded during high tide because it was below sea level. And he saw it as important to raise the level of the road, to put a seawall, and to make it a passable 24/7 road. And that had tenfold effects on the development of areas like Labrie and Point Fortin, and even some peripheral towns like Faizabad and Siparia. It was an important project also because around that point in time in the 1950s, Trinidad was becoming ever more mobile, and he saw that the development of a solid road infrastructure was important, and that is why he also spearheaded the development of the continuation of Wrightson Road from around the vicinity of the Crown Plaza Hotel today straight on to where the Hazley Crawford Stadium now stands. It was a project in progress, but it was Ajodhasingh who really made the political will available to get it done.
Mr. Bissessor feels that in some respects, Ajodhasingh may have been ahead of his time. This is particularly so in respect of his efforts to unite the two major races in the colony.
Labrie constituency, then as now, was a large and very varied constituency because there was a strong Afro-Trinidadian element in the Labrie area proper, which is near to the Pitch Lake and Labrie town itself. But there was also that large Indo-Trinidadian element in places like Rusilac, Grand Straits, and Delay Mondesi Road. And it was Ajodhasingh who was able to really weld the two factions together and create a very strong political support base, because his constituency office was in the town of Labrie itself, which is predominantly Afro-Trinidadian, but the mass of his supporters were Indo-Trinidadian from Rusilac and environs. So he was able to bridge a divide, create a crossover in terms of ethnic appeal that was really ahead of its time considering the social conditions in that era.
Ajodhasingh's tenure as Minister of Communication and Works ended with the emergence of Prime Minister Dr. Eric Williams leading his People's National Movement to victory in the 1956 general elections. Although the PNM won 13 of the increased 24 seats in the reconfigured Legislative Council, Ajodhasingh retained his St. Patrick East seat and moved for the first time to the opposition benches. Among his contemporaries on the opposition side were Tubal Uriah Buzz Butler, member for St. Patrick West; Badis Sagan Maraj, member for Caroni North; Simbunath Kapildio, member for Caroni South; Lionel Sukaran, member for Naparima; Mitra Sinanan, member for Caroni Central, and Ashford Sinanan, member for Point-a-Pair. Ajodhasingh was succeeded as Minister of Communication and Works by PNM member for Tunapuna, Larry Constantine. A former West Indies cricket hero, he would later become Baron Constantine in the British House of Lords. The Hansard reports of debates in the 9th Legislature from October 1956 to September 1957 show Ajodhasingh using every opportunity he could to position himself as the opposition spokesman for the small man, particularly where matters pertaining to his former portfolio were concerned. One such occasion was the introduction by the new Minister of Communication and Works of new motor vehicle legislation aimed at increasing motor vehicle license fees and driving permits across the colony. On taxis and rented cars, the bill proposed a license fee increase from an annual rate of $29 to $39 on the lower scale and driving permits from $1.20 to $5 annually. Joining the debate, Ajodhasingh said there were several hundred drivers in the colony who had not yet paid the $1.20 because they could not afford it, and the $5 fee would put driving permits well outside their reach. I wish to say, without any exaggeration, he is quoted in Hansard, that people used to come to me when I was at the ministry and beg for 5 shillings to pay for their driving permits. It happened on several occasions, and I had to push my hand in my pocket and give them the 5 shillings. But now that it's $5, it's a different matter. It will perhaps create disaster in several families where you have a breadwinner who is a taxi driver. He noted too that private cars were being used to transport children in the rural areas to and from school. But the introduction of the new taxes would bring a halt to the practice. The bill was amended and passed. Another significant intervention from Ajodhasingh on the opposition benches in the Legislative Council had to do with the introduction by then Leader of the House, Dr. Patrick Solomon, of an amendment to the Representation of the People Act to allow for the registration of voters and for the use of voting machines to replace the ballot box in the electoral process. Speaking at the 5th session of the 9th Legislative Council on September 12, 1961, Ajodhasingh said he was opposed to the voting machines because of the estimated $5 million it would cost to introduce them throughout the country, and because of his fears that the new machine would confuse the electorate, particularly in the rural areas. It was to be his final legislative contribution and the last sitting he would attend before his death 2 months later on November 26, 1961. But it was under a new parliamentary system at the first meeting of the House of Representatives on January 12, 1962, that the House would pay tribute to the memory of Ajodhasingh. Describing his death as a national loss, MP for Naparima, Lionel Sukaran, said that upon news of his passing, the offices of the opposition had been crowded day by day with people of all walks of life who had received some form of assistance from Ajodhasingh at one time or the other. Despite Ajodhasingh's well-documented protest and that of other members of the opposition against the introduction of the voting machine in Trinidad and Tobago, the new system of voting was indeed introduced in the 1961 general elections. But the opposition to the machine persisted, resulting in a no-vote campaign by opposition forces in the 1971 general elections and the PNM winning all 36 seats in a larger House of Representatives. The voting machine was eventually abolished in 1976 and the ballot box reintroduced. Mr. Besessa says, Ajodhasingh shares a common legacy with other politicians who emerged in the 1946 to 1950 era in Trinidad and Tobago, a legacy of inspiring trust in the political process. He says in this era, following the introduction of universal adult suffrage that allowed persons 21 years and over to vote, it meant a new wave of exposure that involved the majority of the population playing a significant role in their own governance.
And people who were emergent in this era of political history really had a role to play in engendering the trust of the people, because it would have been that the colonial government at the point in time could have said, you know, this isn't working out, let's just go back to representative government chosen by the colonial authorities. And it did not happen like that. In fact, it evolved into party politics with the emergence of the People's National Movement, and it actually became so very powerful in terms of creating an identity for the people that the politics of the 1946 to 1950 era is still very much a model for party politics today.
Ajodhasingh was survived by his wife Dulari and several children and grandchildren. His wife died in 2008.